Welcome back to the first of 3 expositions, each dedicated to an individual movie of Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight Trilogy. In my first 3 videos, I demonstrated that the trilogy is actually based on the 4 cardinal virtues of Plato in precisely the order covered in Plato's Republic, and that put a lock on my thesis: yes, Virginia, there is a Batman code. Apparently, Batman and Plato have a history. Consider the graphic novel series City of Bane by Tom King in the following frames. The wise man must not be ordered, but must order. Aristotle. Pow. Batman replies, the inexperienced in wisdom and virtue, ever occupied with feasting and such, are carried downward like cattle. Last slide. Plato. Ha! Batman can beat you physically and intellectually at the same time. And yes, that is a legitimate quote from Plato's Republic, Book 7. Here's the full context for those of you who want to read. But now it's time to take a deeper look at The Dark Knight Rises. One issue: this movie is so complex I've actually had to divide the lecture into 2 portions for the sake of clarity. This video is for the sake of explication, and part B, the next, will be my critique. Let's move forward. Nolan regards this movie as his most underrated. Screen Rant ranked it dead last, number 11 in its list of Christopher Nolan movies. Maybe we'll appreciate it more once we see what the movie's really about. Let's start with Bane. The word Bane is associated with death, but his name actually means benevolent protector, a role he served for Talia al Ghul in The Pit. And benevolent protector is the facade of the tyrant, according to Plato, when the tyrant first appears above ground, and eventually, according to Jowett's commentary on the Republic, when that person stands unopposed in the chariot, or if you prefer, tumbler tank of state, he is revealed to be the death and disease of all government. In summary, according to Plato and Socrates, this is the maximally unjust, dikaiosune man, and the antithesis of the 4th cardinal virtue. Moreover, this relationship between maximal injustice and death lets Nolan weave the tyrant of the Republic and John Milton's figure of death together. That's a fantastic concept for a villain. Though he's not as colorful as Lucifer in Paradise Lost, or the Joker, who is based off of Lucifer, in the website Darkness Visible, it's explained, death is a shadow-like character who appears in Book 2 of Paradise Lost, but is only briefly mentioned and fleetingly. Allegorically, he is the consequence of Satan's sin. He's not a sad figure as sin because he is empowered and in control of his condition. However, death is malicious, armed, and aggressive character, carrying arrows and darts. Rather than suffering himself, death takes pleasure in human pain and also in inflicting pain. The only thing he fears is the son who is fated to destroy him. Malicious, taking pleasure in inflicting pain, and fearing only the son upon whom Batman is clearly based. It fits to a T. Otherwise, however, Paradise Lost gives very little direction to this 3rd movie of the trilogy. For one thing, death is a character mentioned only fleetingly. Secondly, Paradise Regained is not, as you'd suspect, about Jesus' resurrection or second coming, and consequently, not a good template for The Dark Knight Rises. It's dedicated to the 3 temptations of Christ in the wilderness, depicting the triumph of Jesus over temptation in the wilderness, in contrast to the failure of mankind to resist temptation in the Garden of Eden. So this movie is going to rely instead very heavily on Republic Book 8, where Socrates describes the decay of civilization and the state in 4 stages, which correspond to the decline from the life of contemplation to vain honor-seeking and glory-seeking, downward into wealth and power-seeking, then merely freedom-seeking, particularly on the part of the Democrats and the poor, and ultimately the collapse of society into tyranny. And again, this parallels the decline of the life of the head into the life of the chest or spirited element, according to Plato, and ultimately into the satisfaction of gut-level appetites. As this decline goes on, the virtues associated with the parts of civilization of the body is lost. The loss of virtue in each of these domains occurs both in persons considered as individuals or in the 3 divisions of the state to which they correspond: the shepherds, the watchdog, and the sheep of society, that is. Remember, for Socrates and Plato, the state are as the men are. They grow out of human characters. The first half of The Dark Knight Rises traces the decline of persons and of society until it bottoms out with tyranny and the tyrant, or the disease and death of all government. Jowett comments to the same effect regarding the parallel decline of the state, the individuals and the virtues within it. Each of these governments and individuals has a corresponding ethical gradation. The ideal state is under the rule of reason, not extinguished, but harmonizing the passions and training them in virtue. In the democracy and the democratic man, the constitution, whether of the state or individual, is based first upon courage and secondly upon the love of honor. This latter virtue, which is hardly esteemed to be a virtue, has superseded all the rest. In the second stage of decline, that is oligarchy for you listeners, the virtues have altogether disappeared and the love of gain has succeeded them. And in the third stage, or democracy, the various passions are allowed to have free play, and the virtues and vices are impartially cultivated. But this freedom, which leads to many curious extravagances of character, is in reality only a state of weakness and dissipation. At last, one monster passion takes possession of the whole nature of man, and that is tyranny. And all of them, excess, the excess first of wealth, then freedom, is the element of decay. Here again is the template, the intermediates between perfection and tyranny. Democracy, based on courage and honor. Oligarchy, love of gain. Democracy, passions and free play. And finally, collapsing into tyranny. To understand The Dark Knight Rises, you have to remember that each stage of social decline corresponds to a certain type of man. Plato describes these men in the process of their decline in great depth. Nolan's movie depicts this, and it forms the basis of the movie's character development in the first half of the movie. And this has many viewers perplexed, including viewers at Collider who complain. This is his worst film by a pretty substantial margin. Here's the thing about The Dark Knight Rises. It's actually pretty good until it isn't. If only the second half of the film was as interesting as it thinks it is. We still don't really know why Bane is doing all this, which gives little weight to his actions. He is, they complain, a poorly conceived character. Bane is actually Christopher Nolan's favorite villain of the trilogy, and you might have guessed, I think he is a very well-conceived, if not perfectly executed villain. So let's pass out the roses before the onions here and give this movie proper credit where it really shines: character development. I've already pointed out that Blake is contrasted with Jen. Their names mean black and white respectively, and the contrast between their upbringing and the duty of society to raise its youth is a major sub-theme of this movie and the trilogy. So neither character is quite as useless as you thought. Wait a minute. What do you mean Blake is useless? He discovered Bane's bomb plot. Yeah, he discovered that too late to do anything about it. Bane already set those bombs off. What do you mean? He saved the orphans. No, Batman pretty much did that. Blake couldn't even get those kids off the bridge. What do you mean? He saved Gordon from assassins. Actually, no, Gordon already saved himself, but Blake... Dang it. Yeah, Blake is pretty much there only for literary purposes and character development. He doesn't drive the narrative much at all. It's easy to see how he could have been written out of the script without changing the plot line. So let's dive into our exposition. The opening scenes are some obligatory whiz-pow involving Bane's hijacking of a plane, which merely proves one point: Bane is a major badass. But the original theatrical trailer begins where the real narrative action is, the events of Harvey Dent Day. Here we see the beginnings of decay in Gotham, that from a perfect state, which Socrates says can hardly be shaken, but we'll see the state is falling into timocracy, the reign of lion-hearted men. These men are men of silver, not gold, according to Plato. Still a step above persons of brass and iron who merely live to satisfy the multi-headed hydra of the belly. First, let's inquire how timocracy, government of honor, arises out of aristocracy, the government of the best. Clearly, all political changes originate from divisions in actual governing power. For this reason, we're swiftly introduced into factions and divisions in Gotham and into four characters in conflict: Gordon, Mayor Garcia, Peter Foley, and Congressman Gilly. In a democracy, we find a mixture of good and evil, but one thing only is predominantly seen: the spirit of contention and ambition, and these are due to the prevalence of the passionate or spirited element, lion-hearted men in competition for honor. In these four characters, there's a corresponding decline in their motives and appetites. This corresponds to the four types of metals in the Republic, and the four are divided into two classes, as Jowett writes. They say that the two races, the iron and brass and the silver and gold, will draw the state different ways. The one will take trade and money-making, and the other, having true riches and not caring for money, will resist them. The contest will end in a compromise, and thus arises timocracy, which is an intermediate between aristocracy, the perfect state, and oligarchy. The class of gold and silver preserves the state, while the class of brass and iron, threatens to drag it down one step lower into oligarchy, the rule of the rich. Gordon is your golden boy of Gotham, diligently keeping watch on crime statistics. Gordon's character, I've said it before, develops in his virtues as the trilogy progressive. He's braver in The Dark Knight, wiser in The Dark Knight Rises, but he's still the Birdmaster, as the name Gordon means, and he's the bridle master to the foal, aptly named Peter Foley in this movie, and he's the master of the belly. Congressman Gilly tells an unbridled Foley that Gordon trusts his gut, his belly, just to remind us of that fact. Now, Garcia, the man of silver, is a lionheart, watching poll numbers and ready to sack Gordon's job, though he can't keep careful watch of society as his duty requires.
Vigilance is the price of safety.
Not on my watch.
This is depicted in the scene where he attends a football game while Gotham is literally about to be undermined. A training exercise is his description of the police activity in the sewers. Plato writes of such a timocrat that they will retain their warlike character but will be chiefly preoccupied in fighting and exercising rule. Thus arises timocracy, which is an intermediate between aristocracy and oligarchy, and the new form of government resembles the ideal in obedience to rulers and contempt for trade, and having common meals and in devotion, however, to warlike games and gymnastic exercises. The football stadium is a parallel to the ancient Greek gymnasium, and warlike exercises are what Mayor Garcia alleges the police are conducting. Worse, he's teetering on decline into oligarchy by showing support to Gotham's rogues. Socrates describes oligarchs as society's rogues, and here the Republic warns, but corruption has crept into philosophy and simplicity of character, which was once her note. It's now looked on for only the military class. Arts of war begin to prevail over arts of peace. The ruler is no longer a philosopher. As in oligarchies, there springs up among them an extravagant love of gain. Garcia, as the script describes, is also involved with catering to Gotham's wealthy class, and he's literally described as being, quote, in a corporate box, end quote, when his destruction comes. He's not being the vigilant watchman or ward of the state that his job requires. In my previous video, I covered the symbolic significance and irony of the destruction sneaking up behind two wards simultaneously, and the preemptive fall of society, or the monuments which were supposed to stall death and decay. You remember that, right? Raven stall. Now let's look at our second class of men, the men of brass and iron, Foley and Gilly, starting with Congressman Gilly first. This is your man of iron, ruled by the multi-headed hydra of the belly, and consequently utterly appetitive.
Sweetheart, sweetheart, sweetheart. Ciao, ciao, ciao.
Shrink boss, shrink boss, shrink boss.
Incidentally, Gilly is a shortened form of Gillian, meaning pledge of the hostage. Obviously, he's going to be taken hostage by the Catwoman. That's another name play for those still keeping count. Or you can call him by Selena Kyle's preferred name.
Shrink boss.
So Congressman Shrimpballs, who incidentally is played by the same actor who played Thomas Wayne in Joaquin Phoenix's Joker, is swiftly depicted as appetitive in nearly every sense. He's not sober-minded or temperate. He's drinking from the first time we see him, and he'll be drunk at a bar when the Catwoman finally releases him. And he's smacking poor Selena on the ass, so definitely not chaste. Appetitive, after some chow, and pretty well unrestrained in every possible way. Now we come to my favorite character in the movie, the man in between, the man of brass, Peter Foley. This is the timocratic youth of the Republic in danger of falling into spiritual decline. Plato writes, such I said is the timocratical youth. He is like the timocratical state, exactly. His origin is as follows. He is often the young son of a brave father who dwells in an ill-governed city. Foley lives in an ill-governed Gotham, of which he, Foley, declines the honors and offices and will not go into law or exert himself in any way, but is ready to waive his rights in order that he may escape trouble. Up to this point in the movie, Foley is just like that. He is the young son of a brave father and dwells in an ill-governed city, and he has been declining honors and offices, but trouble awaits this son, as Plato writes. The character of the son begins to develop when he hears of his mother complaining that her husband has no place in government, of which consequence is that she has no precedence among other women. Furthermore, when she sees her husband not eager about money, taking whatever happens to him quietly, and when she observes that his thoughts always center in himself while he treats her with very considerable indifference, she is annoyed and says to her son that her father is only half a man and far too easygoing, adding all the other complaints about her own ill treatment, of which women are so fond of rehearsing. Now, Congressman Gilly is taking potshots at Gordon's actual role as a father by pointing out that Gordon's wife has indeed taken the kids and left him to move to a mythical place in the DC universe referred to as Cleveland. So, as in the Republic, the son sees the mother shortchanging the boy's father. Similarly, Gilly, or Shrimp Balls, potty mouths Gordon as the Republic states he has only to walk abroad, and he, the son, hears the same sort of thing. Those who do their own business in the city are called simpletons and not held in esteem, while the busybodies are honored and applauded. The result is that the young man, hearing and seeing these things, hearing too the words of his father and having a nearer view of his way of life and making comparisons of him and others, this son is drawn in opposite ways, and this creates a tension within the character of Foley. He's a man in conflict, caught between the rational, embodied in his father figure Gordon, and the appetitive, embodied in Gilly. Since the middle element is the honor bound, he's caught between this, his rational knowledge of what's worthy of honor, and the life of the rich men who merely seek vanities. Drawn in both directions, arrogance and ambition erupt. As I mentioned in the first video, Foley is literally the young foal who needs the bridle, the classic image of restraint, Sophrosyne. He's caught between the spirited lion and honor on the one hand and the multi-headed hydra of the appetites in the belly on the other. To use another of Plato's famous animal illustrations, rather than the lion and hydra, these two elements are like two horses that a charioteer must direct to work in harmony. Rather, Plato likens them to flying horses because one drives the soul upwards, the other drives into descent. Again, here's a light and dark horse in The Dark Knight Rises. The dark horse who strives towards satisfying love of money and appetites is literally a striver, Philip Stryver, first name, Philip meaning lover of horses, whereas Stryver means shoulder or thruster. It's a name coined from Charles Dickens's Tale of Two Cities, along with the name Belioc. Now, having given you the background, let's proceed to a scene analysis. Let's examine Peter Foley in the context of Bane's stock market heist.
It's not our money, it's everybody's.
Really? Mine's in my mattress.
You don't put these guys down, that stuffing in your mattress might be worth a whole hell of a lot less.
As we saw in my previous quote from Jowett, Plato does not claim that the hydra, or dark horse, or appetites of the belly are to be extinguished. They are to be, rather, reined in, harmonizing the passions, whether they're belly appetites or appetites for honor, everything. For example, in the background, we find an officer named Alan, whose name actually means harmony. For Plato, as for the Dark Knight Trilogy, justice is about harmony, and Alan, who says he keeps his hands off the stock market and keeps his money under his mattress, is doing just what Plato insists auxiliary guardians within a state must do. They are not allowed to be involved in money-making. Otherwise, if they do, Plato writes that timocratic men will start to decay into oligarchic men, and men of this stamp will be covetous of money like those who live in oligarchies. They will have a fierce and secret longing after gold and silver, which they will hoard in dark places, having magazines and treasuries of their own for the deposit and concealment of them, and also castles, which are just nests for their eggs. That stock exchange is twice mentioned in your script as being located on Castle Street. Now you know the reason why. Foley has money in that castle, and it divides his motives. Socrates says he, the timocratic youth, will not spend his money in the contest for glory. So afraid is he of waking his expensive appetites and inviting them to help and join in the struggle. In true oligarchic fashion, he fights with a small part of his resources, and the result commonly is that he loses the prize and saves his money. So Foley treats the scene of the bank robbery as rather than a hostage scenario, as a robbery, because he has money in that castle at stake. From here, The Dark Knight Rises will precisely follow the Republic Book 8 in depicting the decay of the timocratic youth into an oligarchic one. But he's still a lover of honor as well as money. He's a lover of power and a lover of honor, claiming to be a ruler because he's a soldier and has performed feats of arms. He's also a lover of gymnastic exercises and of the chase.
Call everyone in. Every car patrol, beat cop, off duty too. Pull them in now. I'm gonna do what Jim Gordon never could.
What's that?
I'm gonna take down the Batman.
Jowett comments, hence he leads a divided existence in which the better desires mostly prevail, but when he's contending for prizes and other distinctions, he's afraid to incur loss which is to be repaid only by barren honor, and in a time of war, he's going to fight with only a small part of his resources and usually keeps his money and loses the victory. That means he's on the brink of collapsing from a timocratic man into a characteristic oligarchic man like the oligarch John Daggett. This happens swiftly. Of all the changes, he said, there's none so speedy or so sure as the conversion of the ambitious timocratic youth into the avaricious, that is, the oligarchic one. At first, he begins by emulating his father, that is, the father figure Gordon in this movie, and walking in his footsteps, but presently he sees him of a sudden foundering against the state as upon a sunken reef. Notice again the imagery of the ship of state, because Gotham is a garden, is a kitchen, is a boat. I've said it before. And that boat, the ship, is foundering. He, the timocratic youth, that is Foley, may have seen a general or some other high officer who's brought to trial under a prejudice raised by informers and either put to death or exiled. Foley will cease to emulate his father figure Gordon when he sees a high officer like Captain Jones put to death by Bane. Incidentally, Captain Jones is a reference to Captain Davy Jones in Davy Jones's Locker, the graveyard of sunken ships. Blake even tells Captain Jones Bane's revolution's a sham. He's watching Gotham rearrange deck chairs while the whole ship's going down. When Foley sees a high officer die as the ship of state hits a reef, he turns his back on his father figure Gordon, and the rational and spirited elements sit humbly on the ground at either side. One is immersed in calculation, the other absorbed in the admiration of wealth. With the rational and spirited elements subdued like this, appetites of the belly pretty much reign unrivaled. Yep, that's pretty much Foley. Happily, Foley is a redeemable figure, my favorite in the trilogy, or at least in this movie. The Batman we know will return to Gotham as its symbolic head, but the head, Plato teaches, must reign in the belly through the chest, just as the leaders in a state must rule over the sheeple through its auxiliary guardians, police forces, and such. That's why the Batman leads the police, not the beleaguered general population of Gotham, against Bane. Standing like a rock at the front of those auxiliary forces is Peter Foley, whose name literally means rock. Peter, Petra, rock. And doubtless that's a reference to another redeemable historical figure, St. Peter, who 3 times denied the Lord, but ended up redeeming himself and suffering a martyr's death. Foley died a hero rather than live to be a villain. And that concludes our discussion of the 4 characters introduced at the opening 5 minutes of The Dark Knight Rises. Let's now turn to discuss our 3 principal protagonists, Batman, Catwoman, and Bane, starting with Bruce Wayne. We first get a glimpse of the reclusive Wayne high above on a darkened balcony, a lone figure watching. He's watching the gathering in the garden at Wayne Manor and watching from the East Wing. For those who recall that gardens in this trilogy involve a reference to Gardens of Eden, you might put 2 and 2 together and figure that the Wayne's self-imposed exile in the East Wing is a subtle reference to being east of Eden, the title, incidentally, of John Steinbeck's magnum opus, and the name of the same movie in which James Dean got his first starring role. More importantly, east of Eden is where Cain went into exile after killing his righteous brother Abel. Wayne still feels a great deal of guilt over similarly killing off Harvey Dent, a righteous brother in the other movie. So the Dark Knight isn't doing too well, and before he can rise, we'll have to see him fall. How so? What's going on with Bruce in the first half of this movie? If the trilogy is based on the 4 cardinal virtues, is he descending downward, losing or weakening each in succession, or if these virtues governing the faculties associated with the body, is he descending downwards from the life of the mind to the chest to the gut? If so, that would parallel the decline of Gotham in this film, which we discussed. Each of these is partly right theories, but specifically, here's what's happening. Bruce is descending downward through the types of men described in Republic Book 8. For the state is as the men are, they grow out of human characters. Let's re-examine the stages of decline in individual men that Socrates describes in Plato's Republic Book 8, starting with the transition from the righteous man, whose soul is harmoniously and rationally ordered, into the timocratic or honored man. Recall that in the last video I mentioned that for Plato, injustice occurred when an individual's faculties or separate classes of the state begin interfering or meddling with the jobs properly suited to the others. I referenced Foley as an example, but briefly mentioned that by the same token, Batman was meddling in police business as well and going against against the advice of his wise counselor Alfred, I should add.
Aren't the police supposed to be investigating them?
They don't have the tools to analyze it.
They would if you gave them to them.
One man's tool is another man's weapon.
In your mind, perhaps there aren't many things you can't turn into a weapon.
Alfred, enough. The police weren't getting it done.
Perhaps they might have, if you had made a sideshow of yourself.
You thought I didn't have it in me.
No, you led a bloated police force a merry chase with a load of fancy new toys from Fox. What about when you come up against him? What then?
Foley is your timocratic man, but Batman, hot-headed and vain, ignored the wise Alfred's advice and warnings. Throwing off the voice of wisdom, he descended into honor-seeking. But the timocratic man can descend further into the oligarchic. Plato writes, if individual elders come from the home, the false spirits shut the gates of the castle. In other words, Alfred and his wisdom are getting booted out of the house, and modesty gets banished, temperance sent over the border. Now the oligarchic use passes into indulging in unnecessary pleasures. The descent from oligarch to democrat occurs when, in the course of pursuing unnecessary pleasures, the youth makes new acquaintances, wild companions who introduce him to every new pleasure. Dang it, where are those pop-ups? Boozing and lechery are purposefully treated as unvirtuous throughout the entire trilogy. Contrast this with Zack Snyder's depiction of Bruce Wayne, played by Ben Affleck. Snyder posted that even the Mapplethorpe painting above his bed represents the erotic and sex as a drug that Bruce uses to forget about his pain. I didn't notice that painting, but I definitely was looking at that faceless lady in the bed, which I call a great silhouette. Nonetheless, in Batman Begins, Bruce, by contrast, is alone in his bed, and that green junk in his hand is certainly not alcohol, and he immediately drops to doing push-ups. There's no woman beneath him, unlike Ben Affleck's Batman, who apparently did all his up and downs in the bed the night before. This prompts some reviewers to ask, is Nolan's Bruce Wayne a virgin? Unless he sowed his wild oats at Princeton in his college days, the answer is apparently yes. Whatever the case, lechery is depicted as a vice throughout this trilogy. Again, more on that in the next video, but here's our first view of Daggett, lecherously giving Kyle and oogling no moderation. Chastity is definitely portrayed as a virtue, lechery as a vice. When Bruce indulges in unnecessary and unrestrained sexual relations, he's not only at the democratic stage of decline, but immediately thereafter falls to the tyrant. Now, let's take a closer look at the character of the Catwoman, Selina Kyle. As I said in my first lecture, David Goyer clearly had intended for the Catwoman to be one of the lunatics or lunartics inhabiting the Narrows after Ra's al Ghul's gas attack. Selina means pertaining to the moon or lunar, and by extension, a lunatic or lunacy, and Kyle means of or from the Narrows. Nolan took the character, I said, in a different direction, developing the Catwoman along the three divisions of the person found in Plato. Let's examine this from top to bottom. Phronesis, shrewdness, cunning, and wisdom. She's got plenty.
Cat got your tongue.
You dumb bitch.
Nobody ever accused me of being dumb.
Yeah, they probably never called you a lunatic either. From the opening scenes where she infiltrates Bruce's manor, we're put on notice that she is very smart and shrewd. Alfred asks Mr. Till, whose name incidentally means ruler of the people, Mr. Till, why are your people using the main staircase? And then asks for Miss Bolton, whose name means keeper of the enclave, because Miss Bolton is apparently off at a bar rather than attending to the enclave where Wayne is holed up. That's a couple more name plays for you. Want to keep your dead mother's pearls out of Selina's paws? Here's an idea. Hole yourself up in an enclave with 9-inch nails, put them in an uncrackable safe, and have Batman stand guard over them with a lethal weapon. Guess what? She's still getting your pearls. And you might get them back if you put a tracker on them, but you'll have to trade your Lamborghini for them. Yeah, she's smart. Remember, Nolan associates the virtue of phronesis with the arrowhead and the virtues of the spirited element, rather, or the heart, with a stethoscope. You can see the burned and scarred stethoscope on the desk in this scene, just as the spirited element in Bruce has been burned and scarred by his experiences. You know what I bet is also in that safe? The arrowhead that Rachel gave him as a gift in the first movie. I know it's too small to fit into view in this scene, but since that arrowhead symbolizes phronesis, and that's the Catwoman's characteristic virtue, wouldn't it be neat if your screenwriters were clever enough to make some subtle reference to I stand corrected. Dang it, who does archery in their bedrooms? Okay, they got that arrowhead into the scene. Moreover, in the ballroom scene, her robberies are likened to a type of Robin Hood persona. There's something fundamentally right, that is, in Catwoman's spirited element. She's got a heart of gold, chiefly depicted in the care and concern she gives, even if it's misguided, to the younger Jen. In fact, she's never called Catwoman in the movie. She's first referred to as Sweetheart and later as Sweetie. Her character flaw is in the belly or appetites.
We've made some mistakes, Miss Kyle.
Girls gotta eat.
And you have an appetite.
Just as Bruce Wayne, when he decays into a democratic man, begins to indulge in unnecessary pleasures, the Catwoman isn't merely stealing to eat anymore. She's a democratic woman of the Republic Book 8, a person of inadequate restraint. Also, the democratic man or woman is not merely unrestrained in the quest for wealth. That's a characteristic they share with oligarchs, the love of money. But above all, their quest is for freedom. She wants freedom from her past and a clean slate to get out of Gotham. Democrats are contemptuous of rich oligarchs and feel trapped, and the desire for freedom is pushed to excess. Lastly, it's time to discuss Bane. This is your tyrannical man, or the maximally unjust or unrighteous man. In short, the absolutely virtuous. And that presents a problem, as Jowett explains. To him, that is Plato, democracy is a state of individualism and dissolution in which everyone is doing what is right in their own eyes, as he pleases.
Do as you please.
But if he is not a believer in liberty, still less is he, Plato, a lover of tyranny. His deeper and more serious condemnation is reserved for the tyrant, who is the ideal of wickedness and also of weakness, and who, in his utter helplessness and suspiciousness, is leading an almost impossible existence without that remnant of good which, in Plato's opinion, is required to give power to evil in the first place. If this person is really devoid of any virtue, then the tyrant, who is the ideal of wickedness and also of personal weakness, has an almost impossible existence. He wouldn't be restrained, brave, and smart. He'd be a gluttonous, craven, and utterly stupid fool. That's hardly a challenging villain or tyrant. Wait a minute. Without a remnant of good that would give power to evil, is this really what Plato thinks it would mean to be virtuous? Let's go back and take a look. Remember, every virtue is defined by Plato with reference to wisdom. To be virtuous, a person would only need to have nothing in them that was guided or controlled by wisdom at all. For example, fortitude, to be what it is, has to look to and see wisdom, and it has to restrain the lion or spirited element accordingly. Plato is clear that lion-hearted men without reasonable restraint do not have fortitude in the relevant sense, though they are very bold, competitive, and ultimately they're destructive and dangerous to society. Temperance, similarly, is not merely restraint. A glutton may lack restraint, but consider somebody who is a so-called simp. They're bridled all right, but not by reason, and that restraint is no virtue, even if they live like a Spartan. So how is Bane maximally unjust and maximally virtuous? In short, something else took the place of wisdom in his character. Let's re-examine the various types of men and see how Plato describes the souls of men in the Republic, Book 8. First, the soul of the best or the just man is well guarded by sophrosyne, rational restraint. I put a little box here to represent rational guards or boundaries. The life of understanding, and with it philosophy and study, is firmly entrenched in the soul, and other values such as heroism or bodily health gain entry into the soul only insofar as they are in harmony with its primary goal. The timocratic soul, similarly, has well-restrained interior life, but heroism and honor instead has taken primary precedence and order above all values and appetites admitted into the soul. The lesser soul, the oligarch, prioritizes money and power, and they have some measure of sophrosyne, rational restraint. They'll indulge the appetites for sex and alcohol, but only insofar as they don't interfere with that primary goal of gaining money and power. The democratic soul is where we see sophrosyne break down completely. Appetites make their entry and exit unrestrained. They're as free as the birds in the air. So the democratic soul obeys the impulse of the hour, as Plato says. New goals and priorities are exchanged at a whim. There's nothing very solid or stable or lasting in this person. It mirrors the democratic state, where every law can be overturned by a vote, and every vote overturned by a fickle determination of the public. Moreover, just as in every citizen in a democracy they're free and equal to vote, so in a democratic soul every appetite is free to put in its own vote. Everything is equal, no better or worse, equal indulgence. Now, what kind of person or societies does this produce? Not to get on a soapbox here, but Plato writes, "Then in this kind of state there will be the greatest variety of human natures." Yes, there will. This, it seems likely to be the fairest of states, he's speaking sarcastically, being an embroidered robe which is spangled with every kind of flower, just as women and children think of variety of colors to be in all things the most charming. So there are many men and women in this state which is spangled with all manners and characters of mankind will appear to the Democrats as the fairest and greatest of all states. And Jowett comments, in the second stage of decline oligarchy, the virtues have altogether disappeared, and love of gain has exceeded them. In this third stage, democracy, the various passions are allowed to have free play, and virtues and vices are impartially cultivated. But this freedom, which leads to many curious extravagances of character, is in reality only a state of weakness and dissipation. At last, one monster passion takes possession of the whole nature of man, and that's the tyrant. But in all of them, excess, first of wealth, then of freedom, is the element of decay. Whether in the state or individual, this eagerness to indulge every whim, appetite, or inclination leads directly to the demonization of authority. All things are ready to burst with liberty, as a result of which you see how sensitive the citizens have become. They chafe impatiently at the least touch of authority, and at length, as you know, they cease to even care for laws written or unwritten. They will have no one rule over them. Such is the fair and glorious beginning, out of which springs tyranny. In summary, persons in this state of internal decay produce a state or nation rotting into decay. How could it get any worse? Introducing the tyrannical soul. The tyrannical soul is just as devoid of any rational restraint as the democratic soul, but it absolutely loves that fact. It is gluttonous and immoderate, but unlike the glutton who simply says, "I need more food," the tyrannical soul is like a glutton who says, "No, I need a bigger stomach. I don't want to satisfy every appetite. I want even more appetites to satisfy." This person's like someone who invites mosquitoes and itches simply in order to have a new itch to scratch. Plato describes this person as ruled by love. Be careful here, my listeners. There are many words for love in Greek. This is not the love that we earlier described as a theological virtue along with faith and hope. His counselors at some point implanted in his soul a monster drone or love, eros, while other desires are buzzing around him. And that monster, love, eros, takes possession of him and puts an end to every true modest thought or wish. Love, like drunkenness or madness, is a tyranny, and the tyrannical man, whether made by nature or habit, is just a drinking, lusting, and furious sort of animal. Love, eros, or desire, I need to say, is his tyrant and lives lordly in him and lawlessly, and being himself a king, leads him on as a tyrant leads the state on to perform deeds of reckless sorts by which he can maintain himself and his rabble of associates. This love tyrannizes the soul of a tyrannical man, and it's not love associated with the heart, but rather with the belly and the basest of appetites which he loves to indulge. So to the question I raised in the last video, how can Bane be an opponent of the fourth cardinal virtue of justice, but be striking Gotham from below at the belly? Answer, because the maximally unjust man is the maximally asophrosyne man, a slave to appetites in the belly, as Jowett explains, desire, and is not our tyrant such a captive soul, master of others, when he is not master of himself. In The Dark Knight Rises, Bane is similarly depicted. He is not his own master. Love is his master, and not a reasonably restrained love. He begins as Talia al Ghul's benevolent protector, but ends up, sadly, like a permissive parent who fails to set boundaries, indulging Talia's every whim, including her vengeful ones.
His only crime was that he loved me.
Now we see what took the place of wisdom. It was eros, but eros not associated with the heart in Plato's thoughts. It's associated with the gut and appetites. It's not reasonable or wise at all. Even his temperance is fake, the gut, not bridled by wisdom, but by nothing but base appetites, love itself. So returning to Jowett's objection, how can the tyrant be maximally weak and have power to do incredible evil? Bane is a portrait of spiritual weakness, but his lack of reasonable restraint and his love for Talia ultimately renders him virtuous. Virtueless, that is, unjust, foolish, dishonorable, and unrestrained, and he winds up the maximally unhappy man. Similarly, Bruce Wayne, at his lowest point of spiritual decay, is described as shedding tears in the pit, according to the script. Now, let's turn to take a closer examination of some of the minor characters in The Dark Knight Rises. I'm going to go through the following list. Let's start with John Daggett and Philip Stryver. Now, John Daggett is your characteristic oligarchic man and represents the decay of Gotham into an oligarchy. Socrates explains in Republic Book 8 how the change from democracy to oligarchy arises. The accumulation of gold in the treasury of private individuals is the ruin of democracy. They invent illegal modes of expenditure, and then one, seeing another growing rich, seeks to rival him. Consequently, Daggett envies Bruce Wayne, and that sets up their rivalry. Daggett, the characteristic oligarchic man of Republic Book 8, personifies the decay of Gotham into oligarchy, as Socrates states. They honor and look up to the rich man and make a ruler of him, and dishonor the poor man. They next proceed to make a law which fixes a sum of money as the qualification of citizenship. The sum is higher than the one in place and lower in another, as the oligarchy is more or less exclusive, but they allow no one whose property falls below the amount fixed to have a share in government.
Now, I'd like to point out that we have a non-board member here, which is highly irregular, even if his family name is above the door.
Bruce Wayne's family built this company.
And he himself is running
into the ground, sir. Does anybody disagree? And check the share price this morning. Crazy gambling on futures has not only cost Mr. Wayne his seat, it's cost us all a lot of money, and he has to go.
Honoring the rich man, making a ruler of him, dishonoring the poor man, money as the qualification of citizenship, and allowing no one whose property falls beneath a certain amount to have a share in government. Again, all of this in Republic. According to Socrates, oligarchs are minimally virtuous. Even temperance, or sophrosyne, is lacking to a great extent. Consequently, Daggett, like Congressman Gilly, is introduced with liquor firmly in hand. Alcohol, especially without moderation, is always depicted negatively in the Dark Knight Trilogy. Let's give some examples. Commissioner Loeb eases his pain and anxiety with liquor. Guess what? He's dead. Here's the villainous and greedy Wirtz at the bar getting liquored up. He's dead. Thanks to this guy, liquor in hand, who's lost his grip on everything. The list goes on, and I'm going to give you a lot more of these in the next video. Sophrosyne, sometimes translated temperance or chastity, paradigmatically applies to sobriety and sexuality and the rational restraint thereof.
Open the champagne. And can we get some girls in here?
Careful what you wish for.
Where's Bang?
Oh, you told him it was urgent.
Oh, where is that mask?
Speak of the devil, and it shall appear.
Booze, babes, and ultimately Bane. It leads to death. He'll give rise to the tyrant like a father to the son, but he'll also fall to that tyrant because Jowett comments, now his, that is, the tyrannical man's father, is the Demas, or in Nolan's view, the oligarchs, and if the Demas gets angry and says that the great hulking son ought not to burden his parents and bids that son be gone and his riotous crew, then the parent will know what a monster he's been nurturing, and that son whom he would fain to expel is too strong for him. Do you mean he will beat his father? Wait a minute, hold up here, Mr. the Batman Code. The tyrant's father, is the Demas? Daggett isn't the Demas, he's an oligarch and represents oligarchy, not Demas or democracy. Good point, my dear listener, something's up here. For Plato and Socrates, the people, or Demas, democracy, give rise to the tyrant, and that's explicit. The people, Demas, always have some champion whom they set over them and nurse into greatness. Yes, that's their way. This and no other is the root from which a tyrant springs, and when he first appears above ground, he is the benevolent protector of that Demas. Nolan doesn't like that. He wants the greedy and rich oligarchy to be responsible for the rise of the tyrant and bane and of tyranny. Nolan is definitely flipping the script on the Republic at this point, and that's dangerous. On my view, as I'll explain in the next video, it will ultimately undermine the narrative of this movie, but that is for the next video. What went wrong? It starts right here. Revising the Republic? You are running, of course, with the big dogs of Western civilization, but let's continue our story. The Demos, or rather the oligarchy for Nolan, tried to bid their offspring be gone, and the son had grown too powerful. So he, the tyrant, is a parasite and a cruel and unnatural son, and the people have jumped out from fear of slavery and into slavery, out of the smoke into the fire.
Have we started the fire?
Yes, the fire rises.
I want him to feel the heat. Feel the fire of 12 million souls. You failed.
You'll just have to imagine the fire.
Republic Book 8 also details the imminent death of our dark horse, Philip Stryver. He, the tyrant, can get rid of bolder spirits by handing them over to the enemy. Then comes unpopularity, and some of his old associates have the courage to oppose him, and the consequence is that he has to make a purgation of the state. But unlike the physician who purges away the bad, he has to get rid of the high-spirited, the wise, wealthy. He has no choice between life and death, shame and dishonor. That's in Jowett's commentary. Bolder spirits, and the name Stryver indicates boldness, and a thruster or shoulderer is a potential threat, handing them over to the enemy. Old associates at least have courage, and he's got to get rid of high-spirited, the wise and wealthy. How will the tyrant do this? The Republic states, and the protector of the people having a mob entirely at his disposal. If he is not restrained from shedding the blood of kinsmen, by his favorite method of false accusation, he'll bring them into courts and murder them. Some he kills, others he banishes or exiles, and at the same time hinting at the abolition of debts and partition of lands. So Bane doesn't kill Stryver at the same time as Daggett. Why is that? Republic Book 8 requires that the tyrant's old associates face death or exile due to false accusations in a court that is taken over by mobs. It's all in Republic Book 8, people. A few words should be said about some minor characters such as Fredericks and Senator Leahy's much disdained character. That's U.S. Senator Patrick Leahy, Democrat from Vermont. He's appeared in 6 Batman movies and once in the animated series. A lifelong Batman fan, he dedicates his profit from these roles to charity, and the Nolan brothers apparently simply had to get him into their trilogy, though some websites say he's among the most pointless characters of the Dark Knight saga. He's not pointless, folks. He's just redundant. The character Fredericks, who we first encountered in Batman Begins, is basically essentially the same character as Leahy's character. That's what you encounter, and why you encounter both of them simultaneously excoriating the greedy John Daggett in the Wayne boardroom scene. Obviously, Leahy is just redundant here. Fredericks could have opposed Daggett alone, just as he opposed the militaristic Earl in Batman Begins, when Earl wanted Wayne Enterprises to begin constructing military weapons. Notice the name plays in that first movie, by the way. Fredericks is not in the David Goyer's original script. Nolan wrote him in, and his name means Fredericks peaceful ruler. And this man of peace opposes Earl, whose name means warrior prince. A couple more name plays there for you. And here's one more. Christopher Nolan also gave a name to this lady in Batman Begins. David Goyer simply referred to her as elderly society dame, and Fredericks, not understanding Bruce's ploy to rescue his dinner guest, remarked, "The apple has fallen far from the tree," ironically indicating how far the wealthy young Bruce is removed from the elder, wealthy aristocrats and socialites of Gotham who've let the city fall into decay. Miss Delaney means from the elder tree grove, and by the way, that's another reference to a Garden of Eden and Gotham. Let's move on. Fredericks is introduced in Batman Begins, and he's not going anywhere because that actor is Uncle John Nolan. Uncle to whom? To Christopher and Jonathan. See any family resemblance there? Yeah, Fredericks is staying around, and in our survey of minor characters, let's lastly go to Father Riley and his orphanage, St. Swithin's. Although Rachel Dawes doesn't appear in The Dark Knight Rises, she does have a doppelganger. And no, it's not the Catwoman. The parallel character to Rachel Dawes is actually Father Riley. The name Rachel means shepherdess. Recall that in Batman Begins I told you that Bruce Wayne is associated with the dog, as is his father Thomas, and in the Republic, dogs are auxiliaries who need to heed the advice of their shepherds. Similarly, Father Riley is depicted as a shepherd in the third movie, and Saint Swithin is characteristically depicted in all his arts and icons with a shepherd's staff. The script actually says at the movie's end, Father Riley shepherds children towards Wayne House, their new home, Wayne Manor. I mentioned earlier that the Catwoman's characteristic virtue is shrewdness and phronesis, and by contrast, Rachel Dawes' characteristic virtue is courage. Whether in taking on Falcone and the mob, the Joker, or facing death, she never flinches. It's also Riley's characteristic virtue. In fact, the name Riley, if you check it, simply means courage. And they have a similar task, raising the youth. Shepherds keep an eye on the dogs, keeping their sense of honor in check.
Hey Blake, you be careful out there. They're hunting down cops like dogs.
The figure of Saint Swithin is also chosen intentionally. Some commentators have noticed that Swithin has a historical connection to rainfall and storms. Saint Swithin's Day, if thou dost rain for 40 days, it will remain. Saint Swithin's Day, if thou be fair, for 40 days will rain no mair. Some think that since a storm is said to be coming to Gotham, that there might be some sort of connection between storms, Swithin, and, well, perhaps so. But I believe there's a stronger connection. It lies in the egg baskets and broken eggs found in Swithin's iconography. Swithin is best known for the Winchester egg miracle, where he's reported to have miraculously healed some broken eggs that were damaged by a construction worker. Father Riley's orphanage tends to broken and discarded youth at their youngest and most vulnerable time of development, and that, I believe, is the connection that fits more firmly in Nolan's mind. So I've kept my promise and passed out the roses first. High marks for character development. This film draws liberally from the Republic Book 8 to build a strong first half. What in the heck went wrong with this movie? Not everybody is going to like my critique, but you know what they say about shooting the messenger? Don't. Critique of The Dark Knight Rises coming up next, so stay tuned to the Batman Code.